Hi, I'm Phil Craig.
And I'm Andrew Loney.
And together we aim to bring you the most scandalous stories and some of the most scandalous people in history. So thanks for joining us here on the Scandal Mongers podcast. Hello, Andrew.
Hello. Yes, well, what a good week. Shauna was a great success.
Do you know what? She was amazing. She's brought with her about 600 new subscribers. So if you're one of Shauna's army, hello and welcome. Thanks for joining us.
You know, we're going to do a lot more with her in future. So we hope you'll stick with us.
Yeah, I've been emailing with Shauna actually. She thinks we should do more relaxed conversations. People will be interested to know some of the stories that we've gathered in our careers, the background to our books, our programs. And she's just the sort of person I think to have that sort of relaxed chat with over one of her famous coffees. Sip. That's her trademark, apparently. Sip, you say.
Right. Well, yeah, no, I mean, she's a good interviewer. And yes, I mean, I think there's a good rapport between all of us and different views, which is always good.
Indeed, yes, it was a really good conversation. If you've not watched it, please check it out. Our last program with Shauna. The feedback was pretty amazing. There's 700 comments on YouTube. My favourite has to be the one about my wife, obviously. Rachel Marks says, Shauna was so lovely, but nothing beats Francis, bringing not only great guests to this podcasts, but tea and cake.
Yes, you were very spoilt. Well, maybe we need to have Francis on as well.
Well, I got told off by some people. People like telling people off, don't they, on the internet? I shouldn't have eaten the cake on camera. It was disrespectful. So there you go.
Yeah, I hope you learnt your lesson there.
Yes, I'll be munching on a Twix later when the camera's off. Some lovely comments. Marianne Oz. I came here from Heretics, which is Andrew Gold's program. I'm also a fan of Shauna's. And I'm now going through your back catalogue. I love the way that you respect everybody and you show interest in differing opinions. Isn't that nice?
Yeah, good. That's what we try to do. Yes, and it is a very eclectic mix of people we've got, but all of them are people whose views we respect.
I agree. And this idea of disagreeing in a civilized, friendly way is important to us because we will disagree from time to time. Okay, here's the best one of all. This really nails us. Anne-Marie Raitt, all the way from Greece. Sensational Shauna. She's like the neighbour everybody wants. You'd love to have her living next door. Pleasant Phil, the happy chappy, always ready to attend the local barbecue with a beer in his hand. Oh, yes, you know me well. Adorable Andrew, the introvert, who's rarely seen, a bit of a loner, who doesn't realise that the neighbour's cat is stuck on top of his pile of hardbacks for 2 days behind his head because he works so hard.
Well, she's got us to a T, I think.
Yes, that was quite fun. What else? Yeah, you're talking to, I'm going to say this wrong. Is it Cher Denise?
Shared Denise, I don't know. But yes, she has a very interesting program, very similar to Shauna's, where she does very detailed commentaries on particularly royal books. And she's very funny, very witty, and very insightful. So I'm hoping that she might come and join us. She's got, I suspect, a lot of crossover listeners to Shauna. So yeah, we've got a lot of things planned actually, because we're doing 2 a week. We've got a bit of a turnover now.
We do, and we have slots to fill and ideas to fill them. Before we get to this particular show, though, we should do the sort of parish notices, don't you think? Because our producer says we forget, and they are, of course, please like, please comment. We try to engage in the comments, both of us, and please subscribe. And if there's anybody you know you think might enjoy this program in real life, does anybody have one of those in real life or in digital life? Please let them know all about us. I just checked a year ago, Andrew, 700 subscribers we had a year ago.
Gosh, well, it's sort of beginning to catch on, which is very exciting, and hopefully we might soon be able to cover our costs. That's the big plan.
I think we're nudging closer to that wonderful moment.
Always open also to suggestions for speakers and topics. We want to reflect what our listeners want, and there's been some very good suggestions of people we should have, which we have followed up.
That's right. All right. Well, this program is really one of my suggestions. A friend of mine, Andrew, brings lots of his writing friends to the podcast. Peter Pomerantsev is somebody I work with in television. Super smart guy, born in the Soviet Union. His father is a famous poet and broadcaster, Igor Pomerantsev. He was working in television, but he had his sights set on higher things, and he wrote the most amazing book about a decade ago about what it was like in Russia in the early years of Putin. As Putin's dictatorship starts to form and new forms of propaganda and indoctrination take hold through the media. And his book is called Nothing is True and Everything is Possible, and I really recommend it to you. He's just written a new book, actually, about the Second World War, which we'll mention in our conversation with him. But I guess we really want to talk to him about Russia. He's now really well connected in the world of American politics. He lives in Washington, and he advises top think tanks, the officers of various senators, and I suspect he might be a little reticent to talk about this, but I know that he does get invited into the White House and places like that for his opinions. So he's a serious player and a fun guy. So,
looking forward to hearing more of what he's got to say.
yeah, you saw through Putin, didn't you, Andrew, from the start?
Oh, absolutely. Well, and anyone who's worked for KGB is always a bit dubious. So yeah, and I've read quite a lot about him, the Catherine Belton book and others. So yeah, a rather depressing subject.
A depressing subject, but I think you will find in Peter a rather entertaining guide through it. His book, the one I mentioned about the early years of Putin, is actually very funny. It's a bit like the last days of the Weimar Republic with Hitler coming down the tracks, cabaret, that kind of atmosphere. All right, shall we do it?
We'll look forward to hearing more. Yes.
Let's cross to Washington. Okay, here we go. Transatlantic link starting now. Well, we're very, very pleased to be joined by Peter. I was just explaining, Peter, that you and I had worked together a little bit, and then you became a successful writer and couldn't be bothered with television anymore, very sensibly. And your new book is receiving rave reviews. Andrew has read it. I have not.
Yes, I have. Yes, I've always been interested in Sefton Delmer.
I have not read it, sadly, but I'm very pleased to tell you I have pressurized Mrs. Craig, who is the manager of Putney Library, to get 2 whole copies for the people of Southwest London. So you should be celebrating tonight for the royalties you'll doubtless receive and the
Yes,
public
exactly.
lending rights pouring into
No, I
it.
lose royalties because if people can get it from the library, they won't buy the book. So I'm a bit upset, actually, Phil.
Oh, right. Well, I'll send them back then if you like.
Quite right.
But I actually managed to persuade you to come onto the show, not to talk about your new book. I'm just really keen to pick your brains about Russia, about Putin, and about that period that you sort of had a ringside view of the beginning of it, where this sort of new form of politics, new form of, I don't know, dictatorship, authoritarian states, postmodern horror show, whatever it is, you were there at the beginning and wrote beautifully about it. And I'd like you to reassure me that we're not all going to die, I suppose, deep down. That's what I'd like to hear you say.
Okay. Have we started?
We certainly have.
Oh, brilliant. Okay. And is it pod or audio? Is it video and audio or just
You
audio?
know what? It's both.
Okay, good. Well, I'm a little bit sorry. I haven't put a suit and tie on. So, Phil, thank you very much for having me. I mean, look, my first book, Nothing is True and Everything is Possible, is about the kind of, even though Putin was in charge already, I caught the end of the sort of relative freedom in Russia and how it went from that to dictatorship, from corrupt democracy to dictatorship. That's kind of the arc that I trace in the book. And as I wrote it, I was thinking of Christopher Isherwood a lot. And there's actually lots of references to Berlin Stories, Cabaret in the book, because he also describes something that goes from a corrupt, chaotic, cabaret-like democracy where there are no values and this sort of confusion about identity, which leads to fascism.
Mm-hmm.
And as I wrote the book, I kind of found myself, as I described Russia from 2001 to 2014, I found myself telling a similar arc. And as I wrote it, I kept on thinking, is this me confirming my biases? Because I've grown up on the idea of Weimar Germany leading to fascism, because I've grown up on Isherwood, am I taking a cliche and pushing it onto Russia? And to my horror, I found that no, it wasn't that I was pushing on a cliche. There seems to be some sort of pattern between moral corruption and the fun and the freedom that can come with that, and some sort of fascism at the end of it, because Russia has gone through the same arc.
For those who haven't read this book, it's well worth getting out. Don't get it from the library though, buy a copy. But it's really, really entertaining. It is actually darkly funny, and I guess as Isherwood is too. You know, there's something grotesquely attractive about this world you portray, and these people who are kind of utterly without shame, who prosper in this new, strange society that you describe.
Yes, and there's something incredibly seductive about Weimar Germany and all those sorts of things as well. And the hero of my new book, Sefton Delmer, is pulled into that world. One of the reasons I wrote it, because I found so many parallels between his experiences in Weimar Germany and his description of the rise of fascism and my experiences in Weimar Russia and the rise of Putinism. There are so many distinct echoes. But it was with horror that I wrote my first book, and I was really worried that I was over-egging it, actually. I felt, am I overdoing this? And it is horrible to work out that I was completely right. It wasn't that I was right. It was the form was telling me. As I was writing it, that's the, you know, you tell a story, you have an idea before you start, but then the story starts to tell itself. As you know, you've sat in editing suites, like the story starts to give you clues as to how to structure it. And it just started giving me these clues. I was like, well, I had this story from the beginning of my time there and this one from the end. I was like, oh my God, you can actually see how society has changed and where it's going. And yeah, I hate the fact that I was right.
So 2014, of course, is the year that he walks into Ukraine. The year after he's gone into Syria. I am very keen to talk today about what I consider to be the scandal, if you like. We call the scandal mongers. The scandal here, which is the very successful operation to win influence in Europe, Western Europe, I'd say especially in Germany, but also, of course, in Britain, that took place leading up to the first Ukraine invasion, then the gas pipelines, even after the plane was shot down, Malaysian Airlines, that Nord Stream 2 deal, which you may disagree, a lot of people say was so very encouraging to Putin. It made him feel not only would he have money from coming in, he would have the Europeans where he wanted them. And if he went further, they wouldn't do anything about it. Is that fair?
I think the deal was huge. And I remember during COVID, being on panels with, I mean, to my ultimate shame, I can't remember which of the senior German politicians it was that had just retired. Was it Gabriel or Steinmeier? I literally can't remember. I think it was Gabriel. I'm not sure. And they were talking in 2020. And now I feel I'm like, you know, I can't remember who it was. Can I just be very clear about that? But I remember being shocked because they were talking about the civil war in Ukraine and Russia's intervention in Crimea. So they were refusing, and these were people who were very implicated in Nord Stream. I think it was someone who'd left the German government to be part of the Nord Stream board.
Well, Schröder became...
Well, Schröder was there the whole time. Then it was one of the more recent. No, it was one of somebody in Merkel.
Okay, well, Steinmeier had been president of Germany. I mean, these are for people who don't know, we're talking about former chancellors and presidents of
I can't remember whether it was
Europe's biggest economy.
No, they just retired, I think. And I know this sounds terrible. I didn't prepare for this podcast, as you can tell, but
Neither do we.
When it was, because in 2020, to parrot the Kremlin's propaganda that it's a civil war in Ukraine, and that it was I can't remember the word, they used a very neutral word about Crimea, certainly not annexation. In 2020, when really there was maybe if there was a second in 2014, when there was confusion, there really wasn't by 2020. So if you're parroting Kremlin lines that way, you're doing it in a very conscious way, and you're doing it because you've made a choice to take Putin's side. And you're doing that because, you know, you've been incentivized to do that.
Is that the incentivization of individuals like Schröder, who became very rich and had this wonderful louche oligarch lifestyle, or was it the incentivization of economics? You know, the German car industry is often fingered for driving a lot of this, and famously is incredibly influential in Berlin.
Yeah, all types, all type. All types,
Okay,
basically.
well,
I think it has to work at every level. It's hard to just buy individuals. The individuals have voters. An effective incentivization will incentivize everybody, and also incentivize Germans who believe in ideologically Wandel durch Handel. This history that they have of change through trade. A myth inside Germany, not a myth, maybe it has some reason to it, that the Cold War ended Willy Brandt and others opening towards the Soviet Union. If the myth in the US is that Reagan stood up and bullied the Soviet Union's submission, the myth in Germany is that it was being open and towards the Soviet Union that managed to end the Cold War.
And Merkel herself, was in power throughout this period we're talking about now. She spoke about change through trade a lot. And I think recently she's actually made a statement to say, oops, might have got that one a bit wrong.
Yeah, I mean, Merkel's very enigmatic, Phil, in the sense that, is such a successful leader in many ways, but whose legacy probably needs to be examined in some ways, and what she was up to. And I personally have never been able to understand whether she understood everything about Russia and therefore wanted to placate it, or understood nothing about Russia. I think probably the former is true. She understood exactly what it was and was therefore looking for ways to tame it, while many others had thought Russia had changed and all this kind of crap. But Phil, I don't know how helpful I can be on these things. I'm not a high flying, a diplomatic correspondent. So I don't know if I can tell you much here beyond what you know much better than me. But
I don't know much better than you. I wanted to ask you about Britain, of course, because the German story isn't well known, I don't think, in the English-speaking world. But what is well known is that Russia began to try and interfere in British and American politics. I don't know how overplayed that was. Were they really influential in Trump? Did they really change any votes on Brexit? I mean, what do you think of all that?
So the Brexit one is very hard to prove. I mean, if I remember rightly, I think there's other people who've looked at this much more rigorously than I, but I remember some of the research at the time about online activity. It's all fairly limited. I think the much bigger potential story that nobody, I think, got to the bottom of and actually ended up with lots of court cases, so I'm going to use the word alleged, is whether there was contact between senior members of the Brexit campaign and Russia, and including donors. So obviously that was a big story, but I don't think anything was conclusively proven. The Brexit is a boon to Russia, whose aim has always been to divide Europe, divide America from Europe, divide Britain from Europe, divide Germany and France. That's always been the dream. Obviously, it's a huge boon to them because with Britain out of the EU, you've lost a very serious power that stands up to Russia. And frankly, for all Britain's many sins and the banality and the sort of soft corruption of the Tory party, frankly, of all the countries in Europe, Britain has been best on Russia, I'd say, certainly rhetorically.
This is what confuses me. If Boris Johnson's meant to have had lots of meetings, Boris Johnson obviously benefited from the Brexit vote, and yet it was Boris Johnson who was sending missiles when Kiev was under direct threat at the beginning of the war, and the Europeans were looking at their feet. So I find all this very hard to understand.
I mean, Johnson still a lot of spies. He took a lead after the Salisbury poisoning. I mean, to bring Europeans together.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a mystery. I mean, do you think the laundromat still functions? Are there still Russian oligarchs running money through London?
Sorry. So yes, I think so. Yes. I mean, I think in the sense that, so look, let's look at it structurally. So a huge amount of the German, a large part of the German economy was structurally dependent on Russia. A large part of the German energy was structurally dependent on Russia. Britain, frankly, isn't. Yeah. Neither were we that energy dependent on Russia, nor were we that in terms of trade dependent on Russia. Actually, the biggest thing was BP, the BP deal with Rosneft. However, we were kind of precision dependent. There were key sectors of the economy which have an outsized weight in the space between Mayfair and Westminster. So therefore, like, you know, in that clubland where there was a lot of influence through precision Russian operations to influence various lords, frankly, very disappointing, who were on the boards of various Russian companies. Key sectors of the, not key sectors of the economy, but influential sectors of the economy, like tax advisors, top lawyers, bits of the city, but actually not, it's not as if Russian investment in the city was so huge, but bits of the city. So I think they had these very precise levers who stood up for their interests. But frankly, when push came to shove, I really don't see Britain as the problem. Let's not overegg this. And we were never dependent. I think the City of London is different. I think the City of London is like, if we start cutting out the Russians, does everybody else run away? You know, it wasn't the Russian money in the city was so big. It was like, if we start chopping off certain oligarchs, what about all our Nigerian, Saudi? Are we ruining the reputation of the City of London as a, well, you might call it a laundromat. They will probably say as a destination for lucrative investment of high net worth individuals. I don't know, but so I think it was much more that was a question. But frankly, when push came to shove, let's not make Britain into the sort of the. I mean, we do love beating ourselves up, and that's very healthy. But we're not the issue here. That's not saying we couldn't do more. That's not saying there aren't issues, but it's incomparable to Germany, let alone Hungary or Italy.
I mean, there's a big story at the moment in Britain about the phishing of MPs. I mean, sort of sex texts being sent to them. I mean, is this coming from Russia?
I haven't looked into it yet. I only saw the headline, but it's interesting that we always assume. I think it said honeypot. So you're like, let every cliche goes off.
Well, the Russians do it. I mean, more than anyone else.
No, they do it all the time. It's statecraft. It's standard statecraft. Probably. I don't know. I haven't looked into this story.
Because I mean, you were talking about the levers of power, and actually, what they've been targeting are members of staff often, who probably do exercise levers of power, and are probably a little less cautious about what they open up.
Yeah. No. I haven't looked into this particular story, but it would not be unusual in any way. I mean, there's been a couple of very big stories on the continent where senior members of the AfD, which is now almost the biggest or the second biggest opposition party in Germany, the far right party. I mean, they actually it wasn't about phishing. They're like the SPADs were I think FSB agents, or definitely working and being paid by FSB agents. So, you know, one thing is a phishing or a honeypot. What is it called? Honeypot, a honey trap scandal. Another is like, I mean, imagine the SPAD to, I don't know.
Well, we've had that here.
The SPAD to David Lammy is being run by the FSB.
Yeah, that would be a big.
I mean, I know the SPAD to David Lammy, and he's definitely not being run by the FSB, just to be clear.
Right. But I mean, we certainly had, for example, people on defense committees and an MP down in Plymouth who had a Russian girlfriend and a SPAD, special advisor.
I know. Yeah, that was kind of weird. Did we ever get to the bottom of that story? It was kind of weird because she was arrested and then released. And
it was all shut down, I think.
MI5
just got rid of her. But it's
so I don't know where it went. Yeah, that's as close as we got. But even that scandal is sort of like there was no clarity at the end. While here, I think it's completely nailed on that these guys are, and they know they are. I mean, as in like I think the implication is they know perfectly well who they're dealing with, and they're fine with it. It's not like they were sort of, you know.
One of the things that interests me is you know, a lot of the world's attention now is focused on Gaza. I mean, we've got Trump and indeed Biden not wanting to get involved with foreign wars. I mean, do you see the West's resolve with Ukraine lessening? I mean, we now see, I think, some Russian military advances, and clearly equipment is being held back. Is this a pretty dangerous point in terms of support for Ukraine?
Oh, immensely. There is, I think, a really, really bad misunderstanding of what's going on. I think this is actually a real case of kind of the wrong language sticking in people's heads. There is no such thing as a stalemate in a war. Stalemate is just the moment before one side starts advancing. Russia is outproducing the West. think the artillery, it's an artillery war at the moment. It's largely an artillery war. It's not I mean, there's a lot of drones, but it's really artillery. And I think Russia is like 5-1 or 6-1. I hear different numbers. Someone told me 8-1. You can't fight a war like that. No. There's every chance that Russia breaks through the Ukrainian lines and marches towards Dnipro this summer. We're in a very dangerous place.
Are you in touch? Are you in touch with? Sorry, Peter. I was going to say, are you in touch with any of your old mates in Russia itself anymore?
Everyone.
Do they tell you anything that gives you hope that Putin might go, or is he just getting stronger and stronger?
No, everyone left. The Russians that I knew were the most clear-eyed about Putin right from the start. So in my book, I can't remember if it's in my book, but definitely the conversations in my book that I was living there, it was the Russians who were telling me very early on, it's like, you do realize what's happening, don't you? And I'd be like, well, Russia is on a difficult road to democracy. They're like, oh my God, you're so stupid. The Russians that I knew, and they weren't all dissidents or anything, just like they just understood who's in charge. They were like, this only goes in one direction. That didn't mean they predicted this invasion, because this invasion seemed reckless. But the fact that it's only going towards authoritarianism and expansionism is just like, obviously, because that is what this generation wants. And that is what appeals to many Russians. So they were the most clear-eyed. If anything, when I lived there, I was a little bit, I was never like the Germans or something, but I was a little bit like, well, it's a difficult journey, but Russia's on the right way. There's only, the story of my book is me kind of realizing like, oh my God, that is not what's happening at all. And by the end of the book, Russia has invaded Ukraine in 2014. So the Russians I knew were very clear-eyed. They've been the Russians that I've spoken to who left in 22, which are many, because many try to hang in there in some way, and who end up leaving in 22, they're very angry at the West that enabled Putin for so long. They were like, wasn't it obvious what you were dealing with? Did you not understand that this was going to one place only? How could you not see this when we could see it very clearly?
How should the West have dealt with it?
Oh, don't give an inch. I mean, don't give an inch. The moment Putin should have been harder when Putin started doing inside the country. So letting Chechnya slide the way we did was already a step in the wrong direction. But then definitely Georgia. I mean, there's lots of moments when you could stamp your foot down. And every time the signal was, oh, we don't really care. So I mean,
but isn't it the worry about foreign entrapment? That in some ways there've been a lot of foreign wars, and there wasn't really the public mood for it. Or
it's not about wars. It's just like no one's been asking. It's not about wars. It's about every time Putin ruins or steps over the commonly agreed limits that he himself has signed on to. Russia is a signatory to all sorts of international conventions about not invading its neighbors. So every time they do that, or every time they murder someone in London, no more firstly, a common position. Unity is very important. No more Nord Stream, no more this, no more oligarchs and whatever. So every step, you should have pushed back. Every time they overstepped, you push back. And instead, every time they overstepped, whether it was the invasion of Georgia, the murder of Litvinenko, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, there was a little bit of like grave concern, and then business as usual. And that was a sign that they can push on and on and on.
And we've seen the same thing in Gaza.
With Israel? Very, very different situation. I wouldn't say it's the same thing at all, but I just think they're very, very different contexts. I mean, here, one is a want to be a returning great power whose aim is to challenge the West. And that's one set of logics, much harder one to deal with. The other one is a state that is, deeply
just breaking international law.
But deeply dependent on the West. It's a different relationship. I mean, I wouldn't compare it very much. I
want to talk to you more about America, since that's where you are right now, and Trump and what's coming and how that might play out in terms of Ukraine and Putin. Do you think Trump might surprise us if he becomes president, or does he still believe he can sort this out in an afternoon with a few phone calls?
So in a sense, we never know with Trump, and that's how people console themselves here. Like, we don't know. And he's a man who, with no particular ideology, who can turn on the, things can turn. The only thing that's consistent, that'll be in his interests. But I would say the one thing that he's been fairly consistent over for decades, frankly, not is that he's pro-Moscow. He thinks Europe is a parasite on America. That's something he believed in a long time ago. That's something he believed. He already took out big ads in the New York Times. We shouldn't pay for NATO members. This is an old idea. He clearly hates Ukraine for many reasons, partly because of the impeachment against him. And all those factors would make us fear that his pledge to kind of further abandon American alliances with Europe and give Ukraine to Russia is probably very much within his thinking. I mean, it wouldn't be out of keeping with everything that he's done so far. But you're right, we never know with him.
And what does if there has to be some sort of surrender in effect by Ukraine and some sort of treaty, what's the next stage with Putin? I mean, will he be emboldened to go elsewhere, or I mean, that seems to be your argument, that he will keep going until people push back.
Yeah, I mean, there's kinetic things he can do. Moldova, Kazakhstan are the really obvious ones. Maybe into start playing around with NATO, or giving NATO a headache, or just threatening nonstop so that everybody's distracted, demoralized, depleted. There are many ways to claim victory. You don't always have to sort of have your tanks in Vilnius. There's many things you can do to claim victory. But yeah, definitely. What is definitely clear is Putin is uninterested in domestic reform, domestic politics. It's obviously clear that he's not going anywhere. He's not planning to retire. And he sees his destiny as tied to the expansion of Russian global power. And that's all he cares about. I don't think he cares about anything else. So it's not that he's going to go, I better go back and do some, regional developments in Bashkiria now. I'm going to focus on that. He's not. He's going to be focused on pushing forward, whether that means tanks, whether that means other tools, whether it means interesting energy alliances with Iran and China, whether it means cyber stuff. I mean, there's many ways you can do it, but he's aggressive foreign policy and the expansion of Russian power at the expense of others is kind of what his life is now. I think that's what gives him a thrill. It gives the people around him a thrill. These are old men who are trying to make up for the perceived humiliations of their youth and maybe of their childhoods.
So do we see more of an axis now with China and, for example, Iran? I mean, or are these quite fluid arrangements?
Yeah, I don't know if axis is the right word. It's funny, I was trying to define this for somebody the other day. We think still in terms of alliances and axis because we think about the Second World War and the Cold War. They're more networks. Everything's networks these days. So it's networks of common interests, and then they can break and be against each other for a bit. And it's all very networky. And in some ways, but they do have a common strategic aim, which is to hobble the West. And that's that can inform a lot of their overriding. I'm so sorry, I don't know what this noise is. A lot of their overriding sort of direction.
I was going to ask you, Peter, you just give a chance to talk about your current book. You're writing about a man who manages to kind of fight an information war in a different age with great success against a very powerful dictator who had himself become famous for his use of propaganda and images and music and this display. Did you gain any insights, do you think, into the age of Putin from digging down into how Delmer fought that war?
Well, lots, I hope, because the book is predicated on that comparison. But so Sefton Delmer, for your listeners who don't know him, ran the sort of covert operations or special operations of the political warfare executive in World War II. essentially doing all sorts of like covert operations to subvert Nazi propaganda, largely with very successful radio stations. I mean, I find Delmer fascinating and contemporary because the way he understood the draw of propaganda, which was about it's not about facts or not facts, which we really get bogged down with, and disinformation and all these sort of terms. But it's about identity. It's about giving people a sense of who are confused about who they are, a sense of pseudo community, and about giving them roles to perform on the stage of life, which both simplify who they are, be in a confusing time, but also surface and normalize our most horrible instincts.
Mm.
And he kind of understood that, and he tried to undermine that. He tried to create alternative forms of community for Germans that weren't the Nazi folk. And he tried to sort of disrupt and mess and pollute the roles that the Nazis gave people to perform. So he sort of undermined what it meant to be an SS man or a Nazi party member, and make it feel quite disgusting, and offer people other ways of being. So I think he understood something that's really clear today. Certainly something that my first book was about, that propaganda is about identity more than anything else. And if you've managed to give people or to offer people an identity that they enjoy, then all the disinformation, the lies and the truth, they come afterwards. We have so much research showing people will push away anything that challenges their biases, challenges their identity. So if you even want to get to the point where we can have an evidence-driven public sphere or all these lofty terms, you've got to think about that first. So Delmer felt very, very contemporary to me. And he had made this fascinating observation of the Nazi crowd and all the other crowds he'd seen in the First World War and other bits of Europe, were that people were performing. They were on the one hand kind of in this hysteria of adulation towards Hitler, but actually it was a bit of an act. It was a bit of an enjoyable act. And his insight was that you could get under that. You could crawl underneath that act and start to destabilize it. I think that now is so clear with social media, where we all perform our kind of our political roles. We all kind of get into these online mobs and start retweeting each other and sharing the same hashtags. Oh my God, we use emoticons, which are literally like Greek masks. I think it's so obvious now that this is and by an act, I don't mean that it's fake, by the way. We inhabit these roles, but they are roles, and you can prize people away from that. And I just found that such a vital insight, which feels so relevant today. And his, I don't know, successful is really hard to measure. I mean, his radios were very popular, which is, as you know, having worked in TV, engagement is usually the metric that we use. What was the rating? Did it change anything? Golly, that's so hard to measure. And he was very careful not to make those claims. But if we take our metric as engagement, then yes, he was successful.
So if David Lammy calls you up in a few months, says, loved your book, do you fancy coming in and helping us do something similar with the man in Moscow? Perhaps he already has. You'd be tempted?
Well, maybe he has done already, Phil. No, no. Look, the British, it's no secret. The British, again, look, we love to chastise ourselves, but actually we're ahead of the game. It's just unclear whether we can fund the game, but we're quite good at, the Brits are actually quite good at being alive to what's going on in the world, for various, I don't know why, we just are. So there is now, this isn't a secret of any source, there is now a Directorate for Information Security, or something like that, in the Foreign Office. That's a whole department, which is, I think in another era, would have been called the Political Warfare Executive. And it's more focused on defense, about how do we stop the Russian stuff, but it's not just like, it's a whole directorate. Now.
And there's 77 Brigade.
And there's 77 Brigade, exactly, in the army. Exactly. Now, I'm not saying they're successful, but the fact that we have reorganized our our institutions to prioritize this issue is important. I don't know if this directorate has much money. I don't know if like creating director is what you do when you don't have money, by the way. But it does highlight that this is an issue and that we think it's important. So I'm not saying the Directorate for Information Threats, whatever it's called, or Information Security, I can't remember, is the same as the Political Warfare Executive, which is what we had in World War II. But it clearly shows that we take this space seriously. And yeah, for Britain and the other democracies to compete in the 21st century, we will need our version of the Political Warfare Executive. I think we have to do, the big difference from the war is that it'll involve a lot of civil society and non-state actors, the way the other side do as well. I mean, the Russians and the Chinese, who invest massively in this space, we know we kind of know their networks, don't we? It's state-sponsored, conspiracy-spewing news channels like RT. It's troll farms who are often not them, you know, a couple of PR companies a few steps away. It's cyber units which are non-state, you know, often criminal, which are often, by the way, employed by different states. You know, it seems to me there's a couple operating now, like who are doing hacking all over the US, and these are publicized efforts. They're called something Sudan, but I think they're getting money. I mean, they seem to be linked with both the Russians and the Iranians. So it's this network of criminals, dark, like, you know, immoral PR companies, state media, weird diplomats. The church is used very aggressively to create this sort of this info stroke cyber activity with espionage thrown in and the odd assassination. We have to work out what our response is. Clearly, and I love journalism, journalism is not the response. Journalism does its own thing. Journalism is not designed to fight these wars, and it shouldn't be. Journalism should do journalism. So we often go, well, we have the BBC World Service. Like, no, very different, nothing to do with this. There's this emerging space of stratcoms, and there's all these stratcoms companies. But having talked to a lot of them, it's they're either working in war zones where it's just, you know, just military psyops, which are very, very limited. Or they're not very hard edge, frankly. So we're going to have to develop our own political warfare doctrine, which I think should be nothing like the Russian one. I don't think we need conspiracy spewing state media or evil troll farms. Ours will be very, very different. I think we're seeing
the aim of this is to make people in Russia and China start to question the authorities?
Everywhere. No, I mean, Russia and China, that's the biggest, that's without a doubt, but that's the hardest one. No, there's a huge competition on for
Africa.
What, did you follow this story in Niger the other week?
I don't think so.
So there is exactly, there's a huge competition on in Africa. And of course, the people with the main agency there are obviously African states, but Russia and China are working very actively to cement their power in African states, increase corruption there, often increase autocracy there, and push out the Brits and the Americans. And from Niger, just happened a couple of weeks ago, the Americans who'd invested hugely there were thrown out. They'd invested into a huge drone factory there, and they were pushed out, and there was a Russian info op to help make it happen in Chinese money. So, but even without going to Africa, which, and again, I'd really like to stress that it's not just Russia, China, America. The main players there are the local states. So this is, but there is a battle for resources going on there, you know, because that's where the resources come to make your iPhones and stuff. A battle for ports, by the way, in places like Togo. So there's that sort of conflict. Then there's countries, but much closer to home, the Balkans, Bulgaria, Moldova. You know, there's all these places where there's a very, very intense competition going on, without even getting into Asia, where there's Chinese interests. So yeah. So
we need to fight back, but fight back smart. We need to do a Sefton Delmer for the 21st century.
Well, Delmer was a man of his time, but I think what would it mean today? It would mean, I think our strength is not going to be what they do, but it'll be the sort of incredible investigations that sort of uncover Russian spies, which we see a bit of. It'll be the kind of OSINT that tracks their corrupt and malign activities. It'll be the nice hackers who get you all this, the inboxes of various, evil organizations. It'll be sort of activists who Navalny do very, very aggressive campaigns against bad actors. Many others, but we have to start thinking about our networks and what we do. And is there a space in it for sort of subterfuge a la Delmer? I think the costs of doing kind of sneaky operations are very high for democracies. If you're caught, then you lose the moral high ground, and sometimes we try to play the moral high ground, or sometimes we even deserve it. But historically, there's always been a space for that as well. I mean, I'm not approving it, but the truth is that it does exist.
And what sort of subterfuge could we do then? I mean, what would be a good example of underhand sneaky?
Well, look, my book is more about how these things are usually unsuccessful, frankly. So I'm not sure. I'm sure somebody from the service would go, aha, but you never understood that there was something else that we did that was worth it. I mean, my book, simply because I see it from the point of view of the outsider. So the stuff that we hear about are the disasters. There's always these stories about the Pentagon tried to do really rubbish fake accounts in Central Asia. And you're just like, oh my God, did you really try to do that? So we hear about the disasters, whether there's something else going on that we don't know about. I mean, as I say in my book, if Ukrainians are using subterfuge to get Russian soldiers to surrender and stop a genocide, frankly, I think that's fine. The decision that democracies have to do is there is no cost to Russia when they do subterfuge and find out, because they're not trying to say they're anything but nasty and corrupt. But if we do it, then there's always a scandal, and somebody gets fired, and we get depressed, and we realize we're not as good as we claim to be.
Well, do you think democracy is in a better or worse shape than it would have been in the mid-1930s now? Given that's where we started, the Weimar.
Phil, I really don't know. I mean, you have now people making, not me, you have lots of people now in the mainstream making comparisons to the 1930s, saying we're in a pre-war moment. That's been said a lot. They're all kind of saying it at the same time. And either it's a concerted PR campaign to sort of rouse people's awareness, which it kind of is. But my sense is the people who are saying it, foreign ministers, defense officials, these are quite serious people. And I'd like to give them the benefit of the doubt that they are seeing intelligence, which has made them go, God Almighty. I just don't think defense ministers and heads of the army walk around saying we need to prepare for war without having seen some intelligence. I just think they're a little bit too serious to do that. A congressman might do that, an MP might do that, they might say something flippant, but you have a lot of very serious people in Europe. I mean, the change in the tenor of the conversation is very striking. I don't know if you've noticed it. It's suddenly very serious. And my sense is that they're seeing something that is making them think that it's not just crazy stuff on Russian TV about, threatening Poland or the Baltics, that actually there is credible intelligence that makes them go, this is very serious.
But are people investing? Are they putting money into forces? I mean, we have opportunities here, and we don't seem to have taken those opportunities up.
I know people are working on it. Is all I can say. I think I think we underestimate. Well, we don't. I mean, you're quite right. They should be doing more. My reaction is, why aren't they doing more? Then you start getting into the details of how you have to reorientate military production. I'm sure you've read, how hard it was in the Second World War. I don't know if you read this book, Freedom's Forge. I'm reading it now, about how the US started to arm for war in the late 30s. Bloody hard. You've got to
absolutely.
I'm
a great fan of Harry Hopkins. I've written about Harry Hopkins actually in a book on 1942. How he kind of sat there at a card table in the West Wing, ordering Boeing to double and triple production.
Yeah, exactly,
An
exactly.
extraordinary story, and that's what the West can do when it puts its foot down.
But it's really, it's a huge decision. And you're restructuring your economy.
Yeah.
These are supply chains that take years to build up. You don't just go and build some more Boeings. It means like rebuilding your economy. It means it also means stopping selling stuff. Because I mean, really, one of the big stories, apart from our own arming, is our slowness to mess up Russian military supply chains, which we seem to thought we could slap a couple of sanctions on and it'll be fine. It's not. You've got to actually break supply chains that have been built up over several decades of globalization. And that's a huge thing. You're basically telling people who make certain types of lubricant, you can't sell to you can't sell to China anymore. So you're telling companies that make dual-use goods that end up in Russian missiles, you can't do business with China anymore after having told them for 3 decades, go and do business with China.
Yes.
And it's not as if I ever have like particular sympathy with companies, but I have sympathy with the companies. They're like, you've just spent 30 years taking us on trade missions to China, telling us to sell lubricant to China. Lubricant is just a very important thing in Russian arms manufacturing, I found out. Sounds very giggly, but actually it's super important. And suddenly you're saying lubricant manufacturers don't do that anymore. And they're like, we've employed people, we've set up, these are very hard things to reorientate.
It's not
but
even
yes, I think
just
it has
selling
to be done.
to China. It's they sell to India and India sells to China.
Exactly. So exactly. So we're talking about changing the laws around your responsibility as a company to follow that through, because at the moment you just have to know who you sold to. You don't have to know where it ends up. So you have to change the whole rules of the games so companies become more responsible. You've got to enforce punishment for it, which everybody's reluctant to do because you don't really want to, you don't want to undercut your own economy when you've got an election around the corner. You've got to essentially, in the long term, say, okay, we're not selling to China anymore, but here are new markets for you in, I don't know, Ukraine and Japan or something. So this is a huge, it's moving the whole liner of the supply chains, then getting to invest in our own military production, which, look, that military production takes a long time. It's not like going to McDonald's. Right? I want 20 drones and 5 Diet Cokes, please. It's like you have to sort of you've got to do long-term contracts, which essentially is admitting that we are in a new era of conflict. But that means government saying, okay, we're investing in you for 10 years to do this. It means reorientating what you were building to building something else. I mean, it's not, this is precisely what needs to be done.
Do we not have practice with COVID? I mean, in some ways, but is that not part of the problem that we the economies were wrecked by COVID?
Probably. I think in the long term, it is a stable model, by the way. And I think it's where we're going. As you say, people have worked it out. I think there's, whether we're talking about, the new awareness around Chinese technology in Western communications, or whether we're talking about the export of dual-use goods, I think there's an awareness that globalization 1.0 is over for security reasons, let alone for all the other reasons. And that we're going to have to reorientate to a world where Janet Yellen called it friendshoring, which I think is a nice way of putting it.
Friendshoring.
Friendshoring. So essentially all your supply chains are linked to
Yes, I mean the
security club. And I think in the end, that's not going to be too bad. And we're not talking about cancelling all trade, by the way. We're talking about the very specific thing of military, obviously military gear, but also the much more difficult one of dual-use goods. I mean, that's what a complicated bit is. You're not meant to sell.
And I wonder, do we make enough of the West's remaining alliances and friends around the world? There's lots of talk of, the AUKUS Pact clearly was meant to help stabilize that region against China.
Yeah.
Maybe bringing Japan into that, maybe bringing France into that. Then there's all the Pacific trade deals that people talk about, making a lot of countries growing fast in that region, the Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, that are very wary of China. There are rising powers that want to be on our side. I wonder if we make enough of that. I don't know. This is big geopolitical stuff for a Friday afternoon in Washington.
But also, I mean, how soon are we likely to go to war?
I just write books, mate.
Yeah, I don't think
I don't know.
I'm also conscious you have to go, and I'm really, really very.
No, as in, like, I wasn't trying to be flippant. I literally don't know.
No,
But
none of us do.
no.
Are we talking about 2
We want
years? Are we talking
reassurance
5
from you,
years?
Peter. We want you to say, "Oh, I talked to my friend at the Pentagon. He said it's all going to be fine."
I think it's really up to us. I mean, in the sense that they're not going to come here. They're going to come to the US or Britain, but the question is, where do we draw the line?
But
And
do we not
and where do we mean by war? What do we mean by war? I mean, there's sort of cyber attacks happening all the time. Do we
not get drawn into a nuclear war? I mean, we have the tinderbox of the Middle East at the moment.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be much of a tinderbox. It just seems to be horror. But I'm not a Middle East expert, to be honest. I really don't understand. I know people, I mean, it just seems to be this, brutal, horrible fusion of death and no doubt war crimes as well. Is it anything bigger than that? I'm not sure.
Well,
where are you seeing
it
it?
seems to be
No,
there are a
I
lot of-
just, yeah. I mean, Iran, obviously, nuclear. If Iran goes nuclear, Israel won't accept that. That could really get nasty. I don't see that triggering a wider nuclear war. I think the thing that might trigger that is fighting in the Baltics or Poland. But let's hope that never happens.
I think Russia, yeah, the rise of Russia and China and maybe some of Iran's ambitions are the great dangers. I think Israel, Palestine is just this return of this hell that has been going on for decades and decades. I don't know. Maybe it becomes. I've read the same articles as you, but what we're seeing is just a sort of escalation of what we've seen over and
this
over
is
again.
maybe a conversation for another time, and I'm very much looking at the clock.
Yeah.
I think you must be as well. But I'm really grateful for the insight at the time.
fascinating.
And you make geopolitical collapse almost sound fun.
Yeah, I mean it's not, but I think yes, I don't know, Phil. It's these are not happy days.
No, they're not. Well, I trust you'll be at the Tabard tonight, which is the last time I ever saw you in person.
Really. I live in the burbs, so like it's weird. Once you start living in the burbs, you always go, oh, it's just 20 minutes to the center of DC, but like you never go. It's this the burbs suck you in, and it literally is 20 minutes on an Uber. And it's always like, oh well, I'm in my jogging pants. I mean, really?
Well, good luck with the book. I hope it sells well, and I shall make sure that we maximize the library sales at least from Putney.
Go Putney. Thank you very much to Craig.
Very good to talk to you. I
Thanks a
really
lot.
appreciate it.
I hope that was useful. Bye.
It's fascinating.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Well,
Lots of great insights there. I mean, a slightly more serious subject than some of the ones we've been addressing. Quite sobering, but it'll be interesting to see what people think of it, and comments they have, and perhaps experiences they've had that could play into the whole story. But
yeah, there's a slightly downbeat at the end, wasn't he, about the future? I don't think Putin's going away in a hurry unless we make it impossible for him to advance any further in our direction.
yes, well, I mean, I feel very, very worried about the US election, and if Trump comes and forces a settlement on the Ukrainians, because I think that will send out the signals that Putin can continue his activities. We've got the worrying activities already of the Chinese. So, we're at a pivotal point, and if the aid doesn't reach Ukrainians for a knockout blow before the election, I think it could be curtains for them, and indeed now for Estonia or some of the other Baltic republics. The whole thing is ratcheting up as it is in the Middle East. One just wishes there were a few more statesmen around and a bit more power with the UN and other organizations.
Yes, I mean, I read an article the other day saying this election we're about to have in Britain could be the last election before the next World War. I mean, slightly alarmist headline, but you think, gosh. And certainly if he does go into the Baltics, that takes it up to a completely different level, because that's NATO. They are members of NATO, which of course infuriated Putin when they all joined. He'd love to grab them back, I'm sure, but that would mean, according to the treaties, we are at war with Russia. We, France, Germany, and especially America. So who's gonna in the White House, who will be in the White House. Are they really going to commit their army to stopping him? Depends who it is, I guess. Crikey.
Well, to be honest, neither of them. I mean, Biden pulled out of Afghanistan very quickly, creating a huge vacuum. So, I mean, we're sleepwalking into war, exactly like the First World War. The parallels with 1914 and indeed with 1939, I think, are pretty obvious.
Well, there you are. Just as we start to monetize our podcast, we get hit by a thermonuclear blast. How disappointing that would be.
And just as we get some extra subscribers.
Remark. It's a flippant remark. I'm sorry.
Well, it was good while it lasted.
It was good while it lasted, yes. What is it? Look at this. Here we are.
Well, we hope
we have viewers in the Southern Hemisphere. It was a lovely English spring morning in the Craig Garden. Look at that. How could we be worried about the
Very
future?
nice. Well, I'll be in Scotland on holiday next week, so possibly we may be broadcasting from there.
Oh, no, I get told off for teasing you for being posh, but I have to ask, are you visiting your old ancestral mansion in Scotland?
Well, I'm doing what's called the North Coast 500, driving around. They've now created this route around from Inverness right round down along the top and down the west coast. So I'm looking forward to that, going as a family.
Oh.
So yeah, we'll be looking at lots of castles, some owned by me and some owned by others.
We'll take lots of pictures and share them on Twitter.
Yeah,
people like to know what we're doing. All right. Well, we haven't decided about next week's show. So when I say next week, I mean Wednesday's show. We have lots of options and opportunities, and we're juggling loads of great ideas, and some of which are coming in from the new people who found us in recent weeks. I did it while we were just off air. I did a quick count. It's not our best week ever. That was when we had that really big show with Lady Colin Campbell a month or so ago. But it's our second best week ever. We've had over 30,000 downloads on YouTube alone, which a year ago we would have thought that was impossible. So we're so grateful.
Yeah, that's great. It's really good to have Shauna's viewers and indeed Andrew Gold's and others. I mean, we're really pleased the way that you hear about us. And we've got Lady Colin coming back, actually. I talked to her yesterday.
Ah, excellent.
So, she may come back for the Queen Mother or for possibly the story of some of the European royal scandals.
Or just to call you a naughty boy again, because she just loves doing that.
Yes, I can't wait.
Yes, and Shauna's confirmed. We're going to go on her show, I think, second week or first week in June. So we'll be on her show. And then if that's successful, she'll be on ours, and we'll keep bouncing back and forth across the hemispheres until people get bored of us.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you all for subscribing, for liking, for writing, for suggesting things. And we're looking forward to continuing the conversation on Wednesday.
We are. See you all then. Thank you. Bye.
See you then. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Scandal Mongers podcast. This has been a Podcast World production. You can get in contact with our show by emailing team@podcastworld.org, placing Scandal Mongers in the heading, or via our social media links within the show's bio.